your guide to the truth. TheNewAmericanMedia.com.
It's exciting to see so many people here, and it's just fantastic to be here in sunny, drought-stricken Southern California.
Yeah, and we're the Yes Men. We're political activists and filmmakers, and today we're here for a very, very, very special reason. When we were asked to host Ed Snowden, it was obviously a tremendous honor for us. Last week, Wired called him the most influential man on Twitter. He was nominated for a Nobel Prize. Time magazine called him the runner-up for Person of the Year right after the Pope.
But today, we have something really, truly special. Because this morning, we actually got some historic news that we're very happy about. We received information from Snowden's team that he has received a presidential pardon.
Officially a free man, but there's something even more exciting than that for us here today. When Ed found this out last week, he decided to make this bipartisan event his first public appearance in the United States. Back on U.S. soil for the first time, Mr. Ed Snowden.
Sit down. It's an exciting moment.
There will be time for pictures and questions and so on afterwards.
Yeah.
There really will be
about as high as it's going to get.
Handshaking moment, so if everybody could just take their seats, we've got a few things to get through today. So it must feel pretty good. How you doing?
Tell us how it feels to be back.
Being back in America is absolutely amazing.
Can you hold the microphone a little
closer? Yeah. It's been absolutely amazing, and the response on Twitter and social media has been great. And listening to people really talk about privacy is just, it's been astonishing. This isn't about me today, it's about us discussing our privacy.
And we'll get, I guess there's a lot of things that you want to talk about, and I know people will have questions, and we have some questions as well, but I think there's one question that's foremost on people's minds in the United States, and that is, how on earth, Ed, do you get rid of those Adobe Reader security update messages that are constantly
Well, it's been a while since I've had to use Adobe. I suppose you could go to settings and preferences. Under that file, perhaps choose to opt out. Opt out of the. Perhaps there's a security.
Can you guys turn that thing off?
Distracting.
It's a very convincing double.
Is this a bad time?
A little bit.
Yeah, well, we're just following something here.
Hey, how you doing, Ed?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Sorry, everyone. That is Edward Snowden, and
he's still in Russia.
What we wanted to have here was just a moment where we could see what it would be like when he got that pardon. Right? This is it. Everybody on their feet. Everybody cheering.
why aren't you here?
You know, that's a pretty complex question. I've seen a lot of things, and I've said a lot of things, and they've led to a lot of things. And you know, people have this incredible divided opinion. But one of the things that we're really seeing beginning to be confirmed now that we're in 2015 rather than 2013 was that people have an answer to the question which really matters, which is not how do you feel about this person or that person. It's would you rather not know what's really going on within your government?
There are a lot of people in American history who have been granted pardons after committing what looked like crimes, but that everybody acknowledged were for the greater good, and they were pardoned. Do you think that's a matter of time with you, or why haven't people seen it? I mean, the bulk of people see that it's beneficial.
Well, it wouldn't be my place to say. I mean, these are decisions that should be made broadly by the public and by their elected representatives in government. But there is an interesting dynamic that we see becoming increasingly apparent today, which is we have sort of a two-track system of justice, which is becoming more and more clear. Now, everyone in every generation of American society has known that we've had an imperfect justice system, which is why we have the powers of pardon and amnesty and clemency. I mean, it's even been offered to people who are firing on U.S. government troops before. But today, increasingly, we see officials getting the same kind of treatment, we just don't call it pardon. We have the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, who lied under oath on camera in front of everyone in the American public. And yet he wasn't charged. He got kind of a pass. We've seen General Petraeus and individuals of that ilk who revealed information which was actually much more highly classified than anything I revealed to the media. The difference is rather than handling it to, or providing it to the public so that we could understand what's going on in our government, he provided it to his lover to get a little bit more favorable biography. Now, that's not to say these are necessarily things that we should denounce, but it is to say that there is a difference increasingly between how ordinary people are being treated and how the most privileged members of society are being treated. And I think it begs a question, which is, when you think about where we are today and where we want to go, what America means to you and what you want it to become, it seems to me that one of the fundamental values of our country is that we hold the people who wield the most power within our society to a higher standard of behavior than ordinary individuals, rather than to a lower standard. And unfortunately, I think we're seeing that changing in a new way.
So, with the odds stacked against you, knowing that, what would drive you to do such a thing as this?
Well, you know, I'm not an extraordinary individual. I'm not different from anyone else. I talked to a number of my coworkers when I was working at the NSA with the tools of mass surveillance every day, colleagues, supervisors, and others. And I showed them this information. I said, look, you know, we have this program with a charming name like Boundless Informant that shows all of the monitoring that we're doing all around the world, including domestically in the United States. And it's showing that we're monitoring more communications about Americans than we are about our adversaries in countries like Russia, for instance. And the question is, do you think that's right? And immediately everybody goes, no, God, no, that's not really what we're supposed to be doing, but what are you going to do about it? You know, what can be done? If you say anything about this, you know what happens to guys like that. Everybody in the NSA was familiar with the case of Thomas Drake, an NSA executive who revealed traditional classic-based fraud and abuse, who showed the mass surveillance programs that had begun under the George Bush administration, warrantless wiretapping. And even though it was not actually argued in court that he was holding classified documents or anything like that, they found unclassified documents that he had normal records of his previous work, and they retroactively classified them so that they could charge him as a spy. And this, again, isn't extraordinary behavior. This is business as usual in intelligence community. This is how it works. But I still had to come in the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and we didn't stop talking about it. And eventually it gets to a point where you go, there's a certain level of incivility and injustice and inhumanity that every person has a threshold that they can witness and deal with. We walk past a beggar on the street and we turn our eyes away. Or we see something, some altercation that we could intervene with, but we go, oh, it's a little too much risk. But what I witnessed was a little bit further than what my colleagues could see, because I was in a position of greater access. I could see further and more broadly, more deeply, just by nature of the responsibilities of my position. And I saw that we had begun violating the Constitution in a way which was new and novel and had never happened before. Now, this isn't to say that things were perfect and sunshine and rainbows before, because we were using secret courts to authorize collection on individuals. Rather than getting real warrants from open courts, we went to a secret court, which was a rubber stamp court. In 33 years, the government asked it to say, hey, can we surveil people 34,000 times? And in those 33 years, the government said no, only 11 times. And even within that system, the judge said that the safeguards that were in place, the oversight was so poor that it can be said to have failed and been violated so systematically that it may have never worked at all. And eventually, much later on, when I came forward and I worked with the press, we got confirmation from official records that even by those weak standards, even by those lax standards, even by the warrants issued by a secret rubber stamp court, the NSA was still breaking even those laws thousands upon thousands of times per year, 2,776 times in a single year. And each one of those violations, by the way, is not one phone call they intercepted accidentally. One of those events was intercepting every single call made in a Washington, D.C. area code over a number of days. So the math is a little out of place there. And as I saw this, and I realized that there was this growing distinction between what the reality of our government's policies were and what the public had the information available to them to influence their votes about. I realized that we were seeing something that wasn't really so much about surveillance. It was about democracy. Because it's said that our government is founded on the idea of the consent of the governed. That's where it draws, that's where it gets the legitimacy of its mandate from. That's how our representatives can be said to represent us. We voted for this policy, we know what's going on. But consent is only meaningful if it's informed. And so traditionally we go, all right, within our system, we're supposed to have mechanisms to be able to litigate this, to be able to challenge this, to go, all right, the government's gone a little bit too far. But of course, we do need surveillance agencies. We need police agencies, military intelligence groups, to be able to solve crimes, to be able to thwart foreign threats. And we want this to be able to work, right? But we also need to have some limitations, some safeguards, some way to ensure that ultimately it's the public holding the leash, as opposed to a few individuals hiding behind closed doors. And this should have been the courts. And in fact, our government and our representatives in civil liberties organizations and non-governmental organizations, they tried. They tried for years, beginning with the Bush administration. We saw that when these finally started to get challenged in the courts and overseas courts, they were found that these programs were uniformly unlawful. They violated human rights. They violated constitutional rights. They violated even the policies and tenets that we already had on paper in the law that anyone should have been able to follow. But in the United States, there was a famous case, Amnesty versus Clapper, which in 2013, when I was struggling with these issues and trying to think about what to do, was actually kicked out of the Supreme Court. They had gone all the way up over a number of years, gone through every level of appellate review. And they said, the Supreme Court said, we would love to decide these issues. We would love to tell you whether this is constitutional or unconstitutional, but we can't, because you can't actually prove you were spied on. It's a secret program, there's secret evidence, and the government says we can't admit that you were spied on because that's a state secret. Therefore, they said nobody anywhere could challenge these programs unless you had some document, some proof that you had actually been spied on. And then the director of national intelligence, James Clapper, went before Congress and he raised his hand. Senator Wyden said, is anybody in the National Security Agency or elsewhere in the intelligence community intercepting the communications of millions or hundreds of millions of Americans, any at all? And he said, no. No, sir, not wittingly, no. And that was untrue. And the senator asking the question knew it was untrue. And yet he couldn't correct the director of national intelligence on the floor without being accused of having committed a felony. And so that brings us to this question of how do you get from this, is before June of 2013, to this, which was earlier this year. And ultimately the fundamental answer to that question, which is why did you do this, is because the only way that we can have any sort of input in our government is if we have a seat at the table of it. And the only way that happens is by knowing what's going on. And the only way that happens in a free and liberal society is by providing the press with access to the information they need to make the tough calls about what is and is not in the public interest to know. That's not the role of government, that's the role of the press.
So the revelations that you've made and that the press has taken up and that have really sparked a tremendous amount of awareness and interest, how does that fit into social movements that may be going on? And do you believe there is a social movement going on, or do you believe these are just flash in the pans like Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter, or is there something more sustained happening?
We're seeing a really extraordinary change happening in the methods and manners of protest around the world, in every country. And typically it's that protests only really gain traction when people no longer have jobs. Because everybody has to work. Who can afford to go out on the street and protest? The rising levels of economic inequality act as a de facto stabilizer, as long as it's within a certain boundary, certain threshold. But as that balance starts to tip, you see in the Occupy Wall Street movement and so on, or the abuses get so egregious that they simply cannot be ignored anymore, as in the Black Lives Matter movement. People feel that they have to stand up. But what's extraordinarily dangerous about these methods of surveillance and monitoring is that we see that even though they're justified when politicians are trying to pass new laws, when legislators are saying, well, the NSA asked me for new power, so let's write it up and give it to them, they're always justified on the basis of terrorism. They're said to stop attacks, they're said to save lives, they're keeping us safe. But you don't have to take my word on this. The White House, in the wake of 2013, when we understood what the NSA was really doing, where, for example, they were internet companies that we all rely on, Google, Facebook, Yahoo, Skype, Apple, all of them were voluntarily, secretly providing mechanisms for the government to be able to request information from them, not on the basis of warrants, but on the basis of class-based certifications, where the government could say, a regular analyst thinks this person was involved in some wrongdoing, that kind of wrongdoing, from the companies. And then another method called upstream surveillance that happened without the company's knowledge even, as it crossed the internet. And when you think about these powers, right, you think about everything that you've ever typed into a search engine, every text message that you've ever sent, everywhere you've ever taken your phone with you, because it leaves a copy of your location with the cellular provider service, you realize that you're becoming increasingly vulnerable to a class of individuals wielding sort of executive privileges that are not accountable to the same standard of behavior as we are. And the dangerous thing is that they're not actually being used to stop terrorism in many cases. They're being used to discredit individuals who are disapproved of. The NSA has programs to spy on people's pornography viewing habits because they consider them to be radicalizers. And in this case, of this particular instance, in this particular story, this particular program, it was targeting Islamists, which might make people feel a little bit more comfortable. But in the same document, it says none of these individuals are known or even suspected to be involved in violence. It's simply their politics that they didn't like. And these programs are becoming more intrusive over time. Increasingly, they're not stopping, outside or on the phone networks. They're coming within the walls of our homes, to the webcams that are on our laptops, to the devices that are in our homes. They travel with you while you're on the bus. They see what you buy online. All of these things are becoming increasingly transactional. And the question is, so if these programs are really necessary, why are they being hidden? And government officials will publicly say, because, well, they have to be secret for them to be effective. And of course, I use these programs. I know that's not the case. And anybody who's worked for the FBI or law enforcement or any intelligence organization can tell you the same. And we, of course, know this is true because think about telephonic wiretaps. We still produce telephonic wiretaps that are used in court against suspects of serious crimes, even though it's been known that your phone can be tapped for over 100 years. But if you look at the actual documents, the secret documents that the government was keeping from us, you see that what they were actually trying to avoid was that what they called, by their own words, a, quote, damaging public debate regarding the scale of their activities, because they were afraid we would do something about it. They were afraid it would enable legal challenges, which of course it has, and now those programs have been ruled unconstitutional. And fortunately, at least the broadest one of them that was collecting the phone records of everyone in this room and everyone else around the world is no longer in government hands. It's been ended as a result of these public disclosures. But it's fundamentally that question. Why are they justifying things on the basis of public safety when they're actually about intelligence collection and gathering? Now, that's not to say that the government simply cannot claim these powers in an extraordinary case or whatever, but if they should, these are fundamentally things which should be public decisions. We should be involved in them. We should have a say. We should have a vote. And unfortunately today, that's not the case. And increasingly, that's having influence on our ability to gather, our ability to protest, our ability to organize. Because even without saying anything, we know we're being watched. And we wonder, what's that going to look like? Not just next year, but 10 years down the road to some individual looking at a government database. And in my view, that's not what America is. That's not what it should be. People should be free to pick up the phone and call their mother or their friend or, a clinic or anyone and not be worried about what that's going to look like to anybody else. We should have private spaces and private lives. We should be able to live freely and openly and associate as we wish and to think and develop and to determine our own future rather than being guided to one that's influenced by all of these external factors.
And one example might be investigative reporters investigating the government, right? They need to be able to do that with secrecy without the government knowing.
Right, and we've actually seen cases of this contemporaneously. Somewhat earlier in 2013, actually, before I came forward, there were cases where I believe Reuters and Fox News journalists and other institutions might have been actually the Associated Press. I'm sure the journalists in the crowd can fact-checking on this. The Department of Justice subpoenaed the phone numbers for all of the phone records that were in that journalistic institution because they wanted to know who from the government was calling them. They wanted to find the source in the government that a journalist was using to inform their stories. And this is not just problematic, it's dangerous. Because what it's doing is it's contesting the role of the press in our society, which is protected, it's enshrined in our First Amendment. It doesn't say, you can interfere with the press if you have a really good reason. It says Congress shall make no law abridging these rights.
So, Edward, we're at a political event here. And a lot of the things you're telling us may mean that activists like us and quite a few people in the audience here probably have to be concerned about Google search terms and stuff like that. But what about the politicians? I mean, what about Hillary Clinton and her private email stash? I mean, what about, because there's a lot of politicians here today. We had, I think Newt Gingrich is out there somewhere. I mean, there's some, freaky people in the room. Can you warn them? I mean, what do you warn them? What about Hillary Clinton and her Benghazi emails?
Well, I don't want to wade into that. Please don't drag me into that one. But what I will say is that there was a quite extraordinary letter written, I believe, at the very end of 2013. I'm not sure which senator wrote it. It may have been Sanders, actually. But it was to, I believe, the Director of National Security. And he said, on the basis of these programs that basically citizens are calling mass surveillance programs, the ones that we've been talking about today, but the government likes to euphemize as bulk collection programs. How do you make sure that you're not intercepting emails from congressmen? How do you make sure you're not intercepting emails from judges and things like that? Can you give me a guarantee that you're not monitoring politicians in the audience, that you're not storing and collecting and analyzing their emails, filtering them the same way that you're doing with everybody else in the world? And the answer that was sent in the letter was, of course, very, very carefully worded. But the response was, we can't, because that's the nature of bulk collection. What we do is we collect everything, and then what I'll tell you is that we don't target any politicians. Yes, your emails are in the database. Yes, your phone calls are in the database. Yes, we can see everything about you if we choose to, but trust us, we wouldn't do that.
Yeah, maybe you could talk a bit about how, you already have a little bit about how the internet has changed in your perception. We Yes Men have been using the internet and the freedom that it's had to do tricky things that are about poking and getting attention for important issues. And it feels like it's been changing a bit. And of course, everybody feels the change when you go to the Google search term and you wonder who's seeing it. But how have you seen the internet change over the last few years?
There's this incredible history in the internet, particularly for young people like myself, maybe younger people in the audience who grew up with it. Who remember what it was like, before everybody was worried about all this surveillance, before people were worried about all of these hacks, before people were worried about people digging through your social media histories. And when many people were still relatively pseudonymous, anonymous. They used a different name, they put forth a public persona that represented them in the way they wanted to be, so they could try on a new face. They could try to determine who it was they wanted to become, and then actually move towards becoming that person. They could embody those ideals, practice them, and eventually adopt them and embrace them. But the internet, it has, whether through corporate influence or monitoring or governmental, and I want to point out, this is not a US problem. It's not that the NSA is the bad guy. Many countries around the world are involved in this. This is a global problem that's going to need global solutions. But the idea here is that we had this open, wild, and free space. And now, rather than being sort of gentrified in a way that some people at least might see as beneficial, we're seeing that this incredible communications fabric that we've built that now touches every life. Even if you don't use a smartphone or a computer, your hospital records are transferred over this, your taxes are handled over this by the IRS and other institutions. Almost every life is touched by some internet-connected system. And this fabric, this extension of the public commons, is becoming increasingly militarized in a way. And I don't necessarily mean Humvees and rifles. I mean that we have military units. The Department of Defense has this new cyber command, and other countries around the world are doing the same thing, where they're beginning to interfere and shape and change policy in a way that benefits them. And it's not that there's no value in this. Of course, people can disagree about where to draw the line and what level of control and influence we should have in society. But the bottom line, when you think about it, is when you walk down the street and you see there are checkpoints, when you see there are monitoring, it has an immediate effect where you notice it and you get a little bit concerned about it. But this is beginning to happen in a very quiet way where the checkpoints aren't on the street, they're in our pockets. We used to say a man's home is his castle, but now a man's smartphone is his castle. And yet, there are so many other institutions and groups that are entering that without your knowledge, without your consent, without your awareness. And this is, I think, creating a somewhat more controlled society. And, maybe this is a good thing, maybe this is a bad thing. But the bottom line is, this is something that should be a public decision where we have full knowledge and awareness of what's happening. And we're the ones guiding the vote.
Well, for those of us who thinks that it's a really bad thing, what are some of the things we can do to oppose this increasing invasion of privacy and surveillance and so on? You spoke of social movements earlier. I mean, I don't want to bring up encryption because that's obviously just bad people hiding their bad things that they're doing, right?
Well, so no, actually, encryption is the government, the director of the FBI right now, for people who haven't followed the issue. And encryption is a method of protecting communications so they're only read by the people who are the intended recipients of them. Whether you're sending your email or your internet connection or your order to Amazon.com or Google or to your girlfriend or your husband, they're the only one who should be able to read that. That's what encryption does. It's already being used in that way. Anywhere you place an order online, it's required that that information, that transmission be encrypted. The interesting thing is that as vendors, corporations began to aggregate and collect a larger universe of transactions over the years, and they never got rid of them, they grew in size to what academics refer to as a database of Ruin. And what this means is not, some evil, malicious project. It means a well-intentioned set of data that's been collected over time. Just, for example, everywhere you ever logged into your Gmail account from, whether it's from your phone, whether it's from your home, whether it's from your office, those are permanent records. They never go away. They've got the IP addresses, the internet addresses that you're connected from, whether that's your house or your office or the coffee shop or whatever. And when you have this for enough people on a wide enough scale, suddenly you have a perfect record of private lives at scale rather than individuals. They're for everyone. And encryption, while it won't get rid of those connection-based events, which are referred to as metadata being the kind of information that a private eye would note down if they were following you around as you went through your day. Like they couldn't hear every word you're saying if they sat near you at the cafe, because if they're leaning over on your table, you'll probably notice them. But if they're sitting far away, they'll still see who you're meeting with, how long you were there, where you went afterwards. In the United States, this metadata-based information is not legally protected in the same manner as the content. So the government goes, oh, it's just metadata. But your records of your metadata are incredibly sensitive, and they say everything about you. They tell the story of your life. The director of the National Security Agency said, we kill people based on metadata. And he's right. That's how we target our drones. We don't know who's carrying the phone. We just say, well, this is a phone we've been listening to, and we think bad things are going on with that, so shoot the phone and hope the right person's holding it at the time. The top lawyer for the National Security Agency said, metadata tells you absolutely everything about someone's life. If you have enough metadata, you don't really need the content. And that's because you can derive content from metadata. For example, if I look at your phone records, I don't need to know what you said on the phone when you call, a Planned Parenthood clinic or something like that, to know what the call is typically about. Particularly when you have the patterns of call, who you call afterwards, what time of day it is. You can see when people are calling suicide and crisis hotlines. You can tell their religion based on which church they call. All of this information is out there. But increasingly, we're developing technologies, encryption, mixed routing networks, that allow us to divorce the fact that we communicated who we talked to, from the actual structures and mechanisms that were used to create communication. Now, this is fairly technical, but the idea is that what you really need to think about is what you care about. And the thing that people debate as saying this is about privacy, this is about privacy, it's not really about privacy. It's about liberty. And in the same breath, we say privacy is dead. That's a quote by a friend of mine, James Carville. And the idea here is that when you let secret institutions, secret organizations redefine the boundaries of your rights without your knowledge, without your awareness, without your consent, things begin to change. And when you're in a period of increasing conflict, you see that programs begin to change. We'll justify anything as a counterterrorism program because we'll go, Al-Qaeda is monstrous, ISIS is monstrous, these are terrible people. And of course that's true, but we get programs, for example, one called Shenanigans, appropriately, where the NSA and CIA cooperated to put drones in the sky in the Middle East above countries like Yemen, and they connected sensors to the bottoms of them, which would listen to all of the transmissions that were coming from every wireless device, every cellular phone, every computer with a wireless card in it, every iPod, every iPhone. And they would be able to tell who lives where in the city based on their devices. And these things could transit, and as drones get, they become increasingly sophisticated, they can stay up for longer periods of time, and we go, all right, well, it's fighting terrorists. So that's a good thing. We can track people, even if they're not suspected of any criminal wrongdoing, even if they're not suspected of any suspicion, we'll say, go ahead and track everybody in Yemen, because there might be some terrorists among them. But very soon, we see the same posture by the Wall Street Journal is now being used in the United States. These programs have a tendency to move from the war front to the home front, and they do it in secret. They make the jump without us knowing about it. And now, in the US, they're not using this to find terrorists. They're not using it to find, murderers who are out on the lam. They're using it to find common criminals in ordinary cases. The US Marshals Service is using it to look for people. And when you think about what can I do, the most important thing is to think about where your values lie on these issues and being willing to take a stand for it. Challenge people, challenge politicians. Make sure that they don't get away with just saying, well, this is about terrorists. Because when you look at how they're actually being used, eventually, you see that the people being targeted by these programs are groups like Amnesty International. I don't think anybody would argue that human rights organizations are promoting terrorism. And yet, increasingly, that's what happens. So if you want to be able to do something about that, you have to stand up and say something about it. You have to do something about it. And you have to make sure that when people try to change the boundaries of your rights, that you go, look, rights aren't granted by government. They're inherent to our nature. Governments guarantee those rights. They protect those rights. But if you start to interfere with those rights, we'll find ways to claim them for ourselves. We'll enforce human rights through new means, even if we have to rely on new technologies like encryption.
So it sounds also like you're saying that maybe encryption isn't the answer that we should all be looking to, but maybe more social movements and actually taking action.
Right, well, they're linked together. I mean, the idea is if you're organizing in the United States, we have within living memory directors of the FBI who were writing letters to Martin Luther King and trying to convince him to commit suicide, who placed newspaper officials and civil rights organizations under surveillance for reasons as small as the idea that they wrote a critical column about the director in the newspaper. And that's not to say that, the FBI is wildly out of control today. Because in many cases, in actually my experience, these are good people doing bad things for good reasons. It's because people say this needs to be done, it's going to save lives, it's going to keep people safe. There aren't any villains here. The problem is that if we're going to do these things that restructure society for the benefit of police and law enforcement, if we're going to outlaw curtains and allow people to walk out doors because it might provide some efficiency boost in criminal investigation, which is, of course is true. If police were able to waltz in any home, that would be effective. But you have to be able to organize and to be effective in pushing back, to plan a protest without the government or any adversary, even whether it's a corporate organization, SeaWorld sending infiltrators into protest movements. You have to be able to organize without infiltration, without basically sabotage happening in the political space. And the only way that's going to happen is if we protect ourselves. And ultimately, we hold to account those who violate the political rights that everyone has.
Thanks. And how do you get rid of those Adobe Reader security update messages?
You uninstall Adobe Flash Player.
Thank you. You can't do that with the government security programs, though, can you?
No, unfortunately, there are a number of groups within the government that have actually, just a few days ago, this was fairly incredible because it shows a new trend. That top lawyer of the intelligence community today, his name is Robert Litt. Senior intelligence lawyer, has every clearance that's out there, basically, oversees the program, says what's legal and not legal. He was commenting on a paper that the FBI and others in the IC were putting forward for how to let themselves into everybody in the audience's smartphones. And they were saying, all right, well, maybe we'll make sure everybody who sells a smartphone has to have a little plug on the side of it that allows the police to search through whenever they want. And then they said, that's not gonna work, that's not gonna work, that's not gonna work. And he said, none of these will work in the current political moment because people simply are too concerned that the government is going to abuse these powers the same way they have in the past. But we should keep our options open for the next time a terrorist attack happens, because then things will change. We can use that. That'll help us get the change we want. What's most extraordinary about that is not the fact that he said it, because that's what happens all the time in these classified spaces. There's always sort of a plan to take advantage of the next crisis. But what's extraordinary is the fact that it was leaked, and 1 month later it was on the front page of the Washington Post. And that's a change that I think we've all benefited from.
All right. We do have one person up here on stage who hasn't yet asked you a question. And Edward, would you like to ask?
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything?
First off, thanks for the gig. Secondly, thanks for making pale guys rebellious. And then finally, what do you think about Joseph Gordon-Levitt? Because he's playing you now.
He's an amazing actor, and I couldn't be more flattered.
He's a little tan, though. He's more tan.
He's also spent a little more time in the gym.
Okay, thanks, Ed.
Listen, we do have one last little exercise that we'd like to do that you could use your smartphone for. First, we're going to demonstrate live. We're going to give a little call here to the Office of the Pardon Attorney for the United States Department of Justice.
This is something you could do. You want to read out the
I'm going to read out the phone number. It is 202. Yeah, just take it down because we're going to do it live. We're going to put it on speakerphone
afterwards.
But so it's 202 616 6070. That's 202-616-6070, Office of the Pardon Attorney of the U.S. Department of Justice. And let's ring them up.
And now we're going to put this on.
Speakerphone, yep, you got a mic? Oh. I don't know, it kind of.
Hello. This is, my name is Joseph Migglesworth, and I would like to demand that that President Obama grant Edward Snowden a pardon immediately.
What's going on back there?
Am I'm sorry, we missed that. Could you say that again?
You can call back Monday.
He says call back Monday, they can do that, they're gonna take care of it. I thought I heard somebody actually speaking those words in the back of the room. Is the office of the...
Is that
Department of Justice in the house right now?
Okay, they're really actually closed. But you can call back on Monday and actually do that.
We should really get that number to Edward Snowden.
Yeah. You have that number.
You can also call the White House at 202-456-1111, Eastern Standard Time, 9 to 5, starting Monday through Friday. So save that number, 202-456-1111. We don't expect that we'll get a direct result, but it's one thing you can do on Monday morning that's a start to your fight to contribute to getting this guy actually back in the U.S.
And so we've got to close, I'm afraid, but I just wanted to, thank Ed again. You're a real hero, sir.
Thank you.
You've really done a tremendous thing for all Americans, and I think
Hell of an actor up there. Hell of an actor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You guys can turn that on.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Great. I did exactly what the Yes Men are supposed to be doing. Yeah, man.